computer. All right, we're recording. All right, it's time for our first case study, case 16A. Remember, the group that goes first outlines everything from the case and then goes from there. The second group just goes from there. They don't have to outline all the particulars since we've heard it one time. All right, so we've got, who's going first? Angela's group. Who's that? Angela, Tawanda, and Jackie, is that correct?
No, Dr. Lamb, it's Tawana, Donna, and Angela.
Okay. All right. That Tawanda, Donna. Okay, I got it.
Donna, are you able to share your screen?
All right. So I am going to make Donald the host. All right. Go to participants. Go to Donald, more, make host. Donald, you are now the host. I'm going to stop my share. I'll turn my camera off for the moment. We'll help you get online. There we go.
I don't see anything on my end, Donna. Am I the only one that don't? Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
It says it's sharing his screen.
Okay.
So we're waiting on his picture to come through. There we go.
Okay, so we are the first group, and this is case 16, myself, Tawanda Carpenter, Donna, and Angela, and so we're going to start with case 16 on measuring organization effectiveness in nonprofit sector, the case of the Community Action Network. Thank you, Donna, for advancing. So just a little background regarding case 16. Luke, I have no idea how to pronounce this last name. Sorenas, I don't know.
Sorensen.
Was approached by an old college friend who Sardison, okay, thank you, Dr. Lamb, Sardison, who now worked in a nonprofit community, and he is the former director of the Community Action Network, which is called CAN, which is a nonprofit organization and government that work on social service and community development in the city of Austin, Texas. So in addition, due to the economic downturn, people were starting to get very nervous because of the changes in a lot of the nonprofit community or within the nonprofit community. They were concerned about the unemployment and less money and services tax revenue. And so many of CAN's partner organizations had to rethink their relationship with various funding sources, in particular, private foundations and government grants and competitive. So many of the other nonprofit organizations were also getting kind of fierce. And with the nonprofit organization, they were very set on and connected to their mission or the organization. So within the nonprofit organization, the mission is really at the heart of the organization's identity. As a nonprofit, they are very effective to the extent that they're fulfilling their mission. You can advance to the next slide, Donna. So Luke had the opportunity to interview many individuals and organizations that were connected with CAN. And so but I'm just going to highlight some of the ones that he did interview. He started off by interviewing Robert Herman and David Rance, who were professors of the University of Missouri in Kansas City. And so they found out that they looked at the organization effectiveness, and I'm sorry, they looked at the organization effectiveness, and they all which was a matter of comparison. Additionally, with the organization effectiveness, the nonprofit effectiveness is related to the organization board of directors in the use of corrective management practice. And so they found out that with this organization effectiveness is the social construct. And that social construct, meaning that the effectiveness is only real in the sense that people believe and act as if its effectiveness was real. In addition, they interviewed Robert Buffett, which is the director of homeless shelter. He interviewed Larry Schultz, who is the CFO of a large technology corporation. He also interviewed a lot of the board of directors and key stakeholders and founders and donors of many of the nonprofit agency. And he also interviewed Dr. Lori Lewis, who discussed a lot about the organization effectiveness in the terms of communication. And so the first thing that she discussed with the organization and community was that it is a challenge, their beliefs and their missions notoriously, and it's very difficult for them to measure anything that's dear to their heart. You can advance to the next slide, Donna. So based on the interviews within all of the organizations, we came up with the issue, well, the central issue as a lack of qualitative assessment measures in place to effectively evaluate the needs and establish an effective relationship with stakeholders. When we look at relating to measuring by the quality of something as opposed to rather than looking at the quantity. And so that was the issue with a lot of the nonprofit organization compared to the for-profit organization. You can advance to the next slide with the secondary issues. So here are some of our secondary issues which affect our central issue is the culture of nonprofit versus for-profit, and the for-profit versus nonprofit, and the impact from stakeholders within the two groups. When we look at these two bullets, we're looking at many of the organizations, in particular those for-profit organizations. They're trying to get the nonprofit organization to sustain their own funding source. Their thing was that if you have no funding, how are you going to be able to help those that are in need? And so that was the kind of the nonprofits looking at the mission and helping individuals, and for-profits are saying, we care about the same population. We just want you guys to be able to sustain your own funding source. Some of the other secondary issues are non-data or evaluation system to measure organization effectiveness, budget cuts or economic downturn, which goes back to the unemployment. If the funding runs out, how are we going to be able to those that we serve? A lack of communication between the nonprofit organization and those that are the funding sources, tension between business metrics and the service mission, and the mission and the vision not explicit as the mission drives the construct. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Angela.
Excuse me.
The theory of social construction is has very, as far as organizational effectiveness, we ask the question what it is. Quantitative measures use metrics to apply to all because of numbers. Qualitative measure has to be specific to the mission of each individual organization. You need to make sure that all stakeholders are involved in communication regarding the organization performance. And it's important to get buy-in from the supporter, especially as it pertains to the mission and the goal of the organization. So that's the research-based social construction as it pertains to organizational effectiveness. So we have Types of alternative solutions. One that is formative. There are types of alternative and the explanation of the alternative. So the good is this, you survey the members of the organization using a separate assessment for each. And I know that Dr. Lamb made that, expressed that when we met and had our Zoom session. And also an uncertain type of alternative is to establish a focus group with information about specific program needs. Mixed assess alternative is to allow of monthly meetings to show evidence of transparency. And a bland alternative is to make program notifications based upon stakeholder feedback to make necessary program changes to produce meaningful results. And the recommendations for evaluations, the measures which have combined possible solutions. We have outcome impact measures, which is how much better is the client, how's the communication, and what is the problem. Outputs activity measures, which is addresses how many services were offered and clients assisted, and etc. The input capacity measures, which focus on the amount of resources used to conduct the activity, and financial measures of effectiveness. The possible solutions in our summative were to utilize satisfaction surveys results to attain and increase participation and support of program, because we saw that that was not done. To create a portfolio of program goals that depict the mission and vision statement, and this is for all of the organizations, since all of them are being assessed. To conduct presentations on successful program activities, to let them know what success looks like, and to develop and monitor a rubric to help establish program standards pertinent to funding resources. Give them a guide to what it's supposed to be and what your expectations are. So Don.
So based off of all of the information that we presented, the recommendations that we ended up coming up with, which would help them to be able to see sort of our thoughts, but also a way in which they could move forward, is to, one, complete that SWOT analysis, which we're all familiar with, talking about our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the organization internally and externally, and then defining a social contract with donors, which would be a little unique to some people because your donors are giving of themselves. However, with this social contract, you're sort of letting them know the expectations, and they agree to those. So you can also potentially know that the success rate of those donors following through, whether it's a pledge or whether it's individual, they will actually do that. And then one of the other pieces is learning how to measure nonprofit effectiveness using qualitative data, because the stories are what's going to tug at people's hearts. And so because in most nonprofits, such as this one, it's very hard to quantify the services that they offer and to dollars. And so that's why we wanted to help them to learn how to actually measure their effectiveness and be able to communicate that. And then developing those SMART goals, developing specific and measurable needs assessments that will help them to quantify their mission goals, which helps to put them into the quantitative mindset of being able to numerize their the quality of their work, but then also will help those people that are looking for number measures. They'll be able to have those. And it relates specifically to the goals, similar to what Dr. Lamb said earlier about his goal of being the top 15% and end up being the top 5% continuously for a long time. And then effectively communicating the vision, mission with all stakeholders. I think that oftentimes people assume that people know these things, but they don't. Just like the mission and the learning or the aspects of the vision for our institution, teaching and learning should be at the forefront, but it's not. But it is in some places, but not in the overall mission. So sharing that with other people would be great. So the way that, the best way for you all to look at the timeline action plan over 9 weeks, we have the goal of helping to increase the mission, the awareness of the vision and mission, establishing awareness of needs. I'm in the gray column, getting buy-in from stakeholders, using our data results from the survey that is from the buy-in, and then securing funding from a source for the survey if we actually need to do something a little bit larger and community-wide. And so the whole purpose of doing this is because we do have an internal and external with donors issue with them wanting to quantify the work that we do. And so by engaging them throughout the entire process, it would allow us to effectively be able to communicate, but then also get their buy-in so that at the end of the day, they will be able to be a part of the process and understand that process. So some of our takeaways as a group were that it's difficult to measure organizational effectiveness in a nonprofit, especially when it comes to numbers. Nonprofit organizations are dependent upon others for investments and support, which actually makes it difficult sometimes to get those dollars because you have to number for some people in order for you to say that you're going to measure XYZ 1, 2, 3, and that you want to get XYZ out of 1, 2, 3 as well. So establishing and communicating with the stakeholders can be challenging, which is why that funding for the external survey would be important. But creating a communication schedule is something that every organization sort of should have, and even my work, thinking about what that looks like can become challenging because you're trying to meet people, a variety of people in different spaces. And then creating some type of evaluation to be accountable for the stakeholder investors, that will allow us to recommend to them that this on-site, or we would say continuous evaluation, lets them know, or the stakeholders and donors know that the organization is looking particularly at themselves, and also wanting to make sure that they engage the people that are giving to them and hold themselves accountable as well.
So any questions
Me, I have some,
at this time?
but I'm gonna let everybody else go first. And other questions from the other group? Anybody have any questions before I start asking mine? All right. I gave you a chance. Okay. So let me do the housekeeping here first. Participants, reclaim host. I'm the host, share screen. Yes, me go. Stop share. All right, excellent presentation. Excellent job. Loved your action plan. All right, I got some questions here. What's a social contract?
The social construct?
No, a social contract.
Oh, okay.
So in K-12, in some places, we actually have sort of norms in which help people to know what the expectations are, but they actually come up with them together. And so by engaging the funders that give to the organization and also the organization itself, the leaders, the social contract will allow both of them to come together to sort of talk about what the expectations are for them.
And what their needs are.
Communicating. Say that again.
And what their needs are. It's not just what their needs are, but it's what they need as well.
Yes, and how they are going to come to that understanding together versus saying, you're not doing X, Y, Z. Well, we've agreed that this is what we're doing, and this is why, and this is what we need from both sides.
Right. So one of the things you got to remember about a social contract whichever side you're on of that contract, you have to define what you need versus what you want. Now, if you think you need everything, will there be collaboration? I got to win on every point. I've got to be the one that gets what they want on everything that we're just doing. That's not a contract. That's not a collaboration. That's the biggest issue that we have when we sit down in situations like this. One group or the other, unfortunately, has not figured out need versus want. And they go to the mat, they go to the death on every point. And so what you need to do as a consultant when you walk in and start working with organizations is you've got to help them define what they need versus what they want. For example, go ahead, Angela.
No, I was just thinking as far as handling conflicts, to have the ground rules and what those social, that in that form of social
and that's
contract.
part of it. Exactly. What I need versus what I want will define the ground rules here. Some things are on the table, some things are off the table. I'm going to give you an example. I told you right behind me is, the family that I've, known for 23 years. Well, the father in that family, he got involved with another father in the community, and they started coaching football over at a little private school, little Christian school out the street here. And they did a really good job. And they got a better job. One was the head coach. The other was assistant head coach, and one did offense and one did. They were a team. And so they got a job at a local private school. And, the social contract of private schools is that I'm paying for my kid an opportunity to play football. Where we live here in the northern suburbs of Charlotte, we're about 20 miles above town in the very, very end of Mecklenburg County at Lake Norman. The local high school here is 4AA, has 3,000 students. On any given year, they can beat Gardner-Webb's football team. They are truly, you got 3,000 students, 4AA, it's men playing. Well, the whole notion here is there's a lot of kids that their parents, especially their daddies, want them to have the Friday Night Lights football experience, getting to wear their leather jackets and jerseys on Friday and the whole deal. Except these kids couldn't play dead. They couldn't even carry the water for a 4AA football team. So they pay for them an opportunity, the buying of the indulgences, if you're Catholic. They pay for them a place. And so there's a local private school here that's got a good football team, or they started the football team for them. And they became a powerhouse in the 1A division of private schools. Won the state title 3 or 4 years in a row. Will Greer, that's the quarterback, the backup for the Panthers, played for them. And there was only 8 teams in the whole state in that league, so not hard to be state champion when everybody gets to go to the playoffs. You just got to beat 3 teams. But anyway, that's another story for another day. So they were very successful there. But they didn't understand the social contract. They thought it was like any other public school, that the point was to win. That was their mission and vision, was to win ball games. The parents who were paying $18,000 a year for their kids to go there, their goal, their vision was for their kid to get to play. And so neither side, one side or the other is going to get their needs met. Now, of all these kids that can't play dead, they're small, but they are slow play, we can't win any ball games. But parents aren't going to continue to pay $18,000 a year for their kid not to even be on the team, much less play. So that was the social contract. So they were very successful, but they got dismissed, and the principal got dismissed as well. because what happened was is they didn't understand the social contract. You can have a couple of what we refer to loosely as scholarship kids, kids that can actually play. You can have 2 of them on your team, but they went out and recruited 25, and they had a bunch of killers, and they just, you know, beating the other team by 80 points and just running up the score, and, you know, got a team that played some of the big time Catholic schools. I mean, the big time private schools in Charlotte played Latin and Catholic and Christian and those teams. I mean, this is a little private school here, and but the problem was is they were competitive and could win in that league, except the parents who were paying the bills weren't having their needs met. There was a social contract. Nobody sat down and said, all right, coaches, y'all want to win. Parents, you want your kids to play. We're going to have to figure out how many scholarship players you can have. I mean, that's kids that you bring in that can actually play. We've got to set a number, but they didn't do that. And so the coaches said, we can have 25 players on the team. Let's get 25 scholarship players. Well, the kids whose parents were paying for this, they didn't have any spots on the team. And so even though the coaches considered it to be successful by winning state titles, the parents did not consider it successful because their definition of success was, I paid for my kid to get to wear a jersey and be in the ball game on Friday night against kids of similar ability. And so that is a learning lesson for us all, is that everybody doesn't automatically have the same goal, mission, or vision for every organization. And you have to sit down and spell it out. You would think that sometimes things were understood. Sometimes the name is in the title, but different people have different expectations. And so one of the things, the reason I asked the question the way I did, social construct needs to turn into a social contract, which means we agree. We sit down and we don't leave it to chance. We don't assume that everybody knows. We have to have a social contract that is agreed upon. And again, it goes back to, we have to decide what's important. What's our needs versus what we want. We can't win on every point. There's going to be multiple points in that social contract. There's going to be some things that are non-negotiable, and you got to figure out before you start what they are. In order to have your needs met, you have to do that. Now, so you have to devise an evaluation system. Out of the social contract comes an evaluation system that has to have metrics for both qualitative and quantitative if you're going to meet those needs. Now, one of the things in the 1960s, it was assumed that for-profit businesses, their metrics were always quantitative. How many units did you sell and how much money did you make? And back in the 60s, it was assumed that all metrics for nonprofits were how well, or qualitative, or how well you serve the clients. That is no longer the case. I pulled it up on my phone to show you. You probably can't see it. I got the oil changed in my truck serviced on Tuesday. What did I get from Chevrolet within a day? A Qualtrics survey wanting to know about the quality of that service. Yep. People understand now that even in for-profit businesses, qualitative data, how people feel, how well they were served, matters. And so most everything you do now, before you can get home on your phone, there's a survey. How well did we do? So that's only a recent phenomenon. And I say recent, that's the last 50, 60 years. More so in this century than last, but even there were some people, that were kind of ahead of the curve. But now with the technology that we have, for-profits now have to be concerned with qualitative, how well they served as well. But because of what? Social media. Now, I try I'm trying to be a better person. I'm still Saul on the road to Damascus. I'm not Paul yet, but I'm trying. So when I got in my truck Thursday morning and the oil light, a big alarm went off and it said add oil low. I just had it serviced on Tuesday. My first thought was I ought to kill somebody or wring their neck, but I checked myself before I wrecked myself. And so I called them and said, the light's on, there's obviously a problem. They said, well, bring it on in. And I went in, and sure enough, they just hand tightened the drain plug on the oil pan, and it was leaking. And he said it only leaked out about a half a quart, which means a quart and a half. You know how we always, you got to take everything with a grain of salt. Now, when I did my survey, I'm going to be kind this time. I've had my oil changed in that truck 14 times. Only a couple at this dealership. Normally it's one here at home, but that one was more convenient than the one in Shelby. But I had the oil changed in it. But I'm going to give them an opportunity. So I didn't blister them on their, on the Qualtrics survey. But now the next time I go in and they do something that's done and potentially that's harmful to me, what am I going to do on social media? I'm going to light them up. That's why. So you got to understand, and the point of that story is this: people, corporations they haven't changed their notion about service, I suspect, in this century. It's just they're afraid of social media now. They have to be aware of their service because the ease in which it is for a bad word to get out on them. Some corporations were concerned before because of the business, but all of them have to be now, or if you don't, you'll get killed in your marketing efforts on social media. And so that has made for-profits have to be concerned with the qualitative piece as well as the quantitative piece. Now, this case highlights nonprofits since 2008 have to be concerned with their quantitative numbers as well. Previously, they just had to worry about how well they served. Now, in an economy that, poor President Obama, he assumed the worst economy ever. It just, people don't remember, it just crashed completely out. He came in and he did a yeoman's job. But we've never returned. I know the current administration claims, but they used a false indicator. They used a process variable rather than an outcome variable to argue the greatest economy ever, which is the stock market. Stock market is not a outcome variable. It's simply a process variable. And so this argument that we had this great economy before COVID was not true in any stretch of the imagination. And then they pointed to an easily manipulative statistic, which is unemployment rate. Well, what we did is we reduced the time that you spent on the unemployment to next to zero. And once those benefits were exhausted, we just simply don't call you unemployed anymore. We simply refer to you as this new term, which is no longer in the workforce. And so the real unemployment rate before COVID was well into the double figures. 20% in a lot of rural counties in North and South Carolina was up in the 20s. But now unemployment was at 4% because that was a metric. We changed the metrics for that terminology. We couldn't get that number down, and so we changed how we measured it. That's another trick in the business. We didn't go out and tell everybody that we changed the definition of unemployment. Everybody assumes that's people who, that need a job and are looking for one. No, that's people who have spent 3 weeks and getting 3 weeks unemployment benefits, and when their unemployment runs out, they're no longer unemployed. They're simply no longer in the workforce. And so we completely used a process variable as one of the indicators of a great economy, and we manipulated the other one to claim a great economy, when in truth, we never really recovered that well from the crash of 2008. Now, what does it have to do with the price of eggs this morning, Dale? Well, it has to do with nonprofits. they now, for the first time in the last 12 years, have to be concerned with how many people they serve. They were only ever concerned before with how well they serve. And now that metric is again, that part of that social contract is, you know, we need for you to serve at least this many, or we can't get the county commissioners to give you money. The folks over, I told you, I got involved with the Cleveland County Rescue Mission, which is the homeless shelter in Cleveland County, through Dr. Hamilton. And unfortunately, they have metrics now that they have to meet in terms of how many beds they have filled every night for the county commissioners to give them money. That's just the way the county commissioners need that. That's a non-negotiable with them. They said, you know, the voters will kill us if we don't have these numbers. Remember, we're in elected positions. And if we don't have these numbers, you know, they're going to vote us out. And so we have no choice, but if you don't meet these numbers, now we want you to serve them well, but we need for you to serve this many. Again, that's part of that social contract that you've got to write down. And as a consultant, you have to have that same kind of contract with the company. What do you need and what do you want? Which numbers are not, you know, what do you need me to do for you? Do you need for, you know, usage to increase, which is quantitative, or do you need for service and quality to increase? What's our goal here? What's your mission and vision? What's our goal? What are we going to do? What do you need for me to do? It can't be we just assume that we know. You know what happens in the business school, they teach the Abilene paradox. I've never been involved in the Abilene paradox. I have done the El Paso paradox. The Abilene paradox is based on that nobody would intentionally go to Abilene, Texas in the summertime. It's a nasty, dirty place at any time, but it's miserably hot there in the summer, and that nobody would go. And that we both ended up, Donald and I both ended up in Abilene because he thought I wanted to go and I thought he wanted to go. We did not agree to a social contract. And so we both ended up in Abilene, and both are unhappy because we thought we didn't communicate. We didn't write down what was important to both of us. We assumed we knew what the other one wanted. In business, in business, in contractual law and business, they call that the Abilene paradox. I unfortunately ended up in El Paso the last week in July one time. And I can tell you, you wouldn't want to go unless you had to. So you should ask before you go. So that's the social contract. Now, the last thing, and we'll go to the next group here. Can you see this?
Yes.
All right.
The St.
What
Jude
is
calendar.
this? It's a calendar from St. Jude. All right. So every month they send me well, no, I'm wrong. Every week they send me a donation card. Every week, because I'm a donor to. I write them a check. And they figured me out. Every time they send me something like this. And I was going to write them my normal check that, you know, this month or this week. I usually twice a month. Every how many I get, I send them a check every time. I'm a sucker. I can't help it. I'd do better off if I could just do the normal thing, but I write them a check. So when they sent me this and I saw that child's face, I doubled the amount that I wrote on my check this month. I can't help it. I had a child that looked just like that when I was an elementary principal a long time ago. I still remember that child to this day. Now, they know I'm a sucker for that. I freely admit that. And so my question to you, to kind of at the end of the social contract here, is what are the ethics that play into the social contract? Is it unethical for St. Jude's to send me pictures of children that just tear my heart out?
No. That's more of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Marketing. Because if you have a child, everyone knows if you have a child or an animal on your literature, you're more apt to give quicker.
Now, when we talk about IRB, we talk about bias and and deception and those kinds of things. There are people who would say that that skirts those rules. I think it's okay. And I'm the one that, I would have probably just, spent it up, wasted it on, liquor and fast women if I hadn't sent it to them. So the ethics goes back to the purpose and the reason, and that's part of the social contract of your mission vision. I mean, I know what St. Jude's is trying to do. They're trying to help children. They're trying to allow children to get the medical care they need regardless of their family's wealth or influence. And in the end, I think that makes it okay. Goes back to your social contract has to be linked, has to be linked back to your mission vision. Too many times we don't. The things that go wrong in the social contract, and I'm watching our time here, or as everybody thinks that everything that's debatable is what they need and can't collaborate, can't give any ground, got to win every point. That's number one. And number two, they fail to tie their marketing and what is in that contract back to their mission vision. It's perfectly acceptable to me to send me a picture of a child that just rips my heart out, because that's their mission vision, is to help these children. I don't consider that to be deceptive or biased. I don't consider that to be unethical. You know who you're dealing with here. Now, if this was a company trying to sell me replacement windows, I would consider that would not be an ethical thing to do. But because they are St. Jude's, and I know that that's who they are and what they do, that makes it okay. So that's the point. So that kind of summarizes my point. There is no template for a social contract. It has to be figured out with every company and every funding source board of directors. It's an individual thing. I can't give you a template for a social contract. It depends on what the organization, profit, nonprofit. It depends on what their mission vision is. It depends on their funding stream. The homeless shelter, the men's shelter, the rescue mission in Shelby gets both public and private funds. Is it public? Is it private? Is it federal? Is it state? All those things factor into the social contract. And so for you as a consultant, what that means is your toolbox has to be full. You have to know qualitative and quantitative methodology so that you set up systems of data collection. See, here's the thing. You walk in and say, well, where's your data? When you go in as a consultant, 9 times out of 10, you have to set up that data collection methodology. And what did I tell you to start with today? The analytics that you can do is based on how you set up the collection to begin with. 2 weeks into my final story, 2 weeks into the current dean of the School of Education, 2 weeks into his tenure, 2 or 3 summers ago, whenever he came in July, he came running down to my office and said, where'd you get these reports? And I said, I generated them out of task stream. I built the report and generated it. He said, can you run this for all the other programs, licensure programs in the School of Ed? And I said, no. He said, why not? You ran this one. I said, they haven't set up the DRFs, and they haven't built the reports, and the data's not there. I said, it's easy to pull it out. I can show you. how to pull it out in about 30 seconds. The trick is setting up the rubric to catch the data and then building the report. After that, it's just a matter of pushing a button. As a consultant, you don't get to push the button. You've got to set up the rubric, what's important, and build it, and have a collection, a non-biased collection system that is both valid and reliable. And then you can push the button, then and only then. Too many consultants walk into organizations thinking all they got to do is push the button. We can hire any idiot off the street, witness me, to push the button. It's building the rubric. What is the contract? You know, how do we translate that? We take that and then translate it into what do we need to collect? How are we going to collect it? And then how are we going to analyze it? And then we can push the button. But until then, you've got to build that all along the way. But it all starts with the social contract. What has the organization and its funding source agreed to? And then what do you agree that you can do with that organization? That's the point of this case study. It's not, you can't roll the ball out or just push the button. There is a lot of work in consultancy. Questions that you have for me? All right, so now we're going to go to our next group. Remember, you can just get to your findings, and we'll see how they compare. Who's going to be our host?
Jackie.
Jackie is now the host. I will stop my share and stop my video, and you can go. Look at that.
Okay. You see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm on the two screens at the same time.
That's okay.
Okay, let me go back to our, okay. So when I look at the nonprofit CAN, and our central issue was how to measure and demonstrate the effectiveness of the nonprofit. And again, we know what the case was because of the economic downturn. And we came up with the evaluation is the measurement by its mission, measured by the services provides, and or with the interaction with the people they serve. How well does the organization really live up to its missions and goals? The measurement of effectiveness in relation to the amount of funds it used for a particular program, and funding organizations want to know how much money is spent on resources. And those resources could be how much money that you're giving to a particular client to meet a particular need, or just the overall. And the budget should reflect the money that's used, and the number of people served or helped can be quantified, but can the degree of that help make the difference in being quantified? How to allocate the funds to community service projects, knowing that all funds cannot be distributed equally. Let's see, next. And how to measure the objectives and quantify the service activities provided, putting a measuring stick, how a client life has changed or impacted. Communication, the effectiveness, meeting of goals, and the efficiency, the amount of resources used of the organization, and what processes used to reach the outcomes and demonstrate those processes. Some notes at the bottom. Sorry, you all, I'm trying to read some of my notes at the bottom too. And our gathering data and supporting information. Of course, we all said about the interviewing for different people. The social impact cannot be always measured. Communication can reveal success and failure, and with understanding. And they also looked at some research articles on some board of directors to get some ideas of effectiveness and effective management and how effectiveness is achieved, organizational responsiveness, and again with the interviewing. Going to skip on down to that. And the quantity is quantifying as money spent overall, money spent on individual programs, the average money spent on each client, materials and resources used for books, counseling sessions, and the number of referrals for other agencies like food banks. You have your personnel that's used versus your volunteers that's used, and what services were delivered. And if you're looking at homeless shelters, how organizations are faced with how to make the money go to go further. Case in point, when you look at trying to quantify and qualify as far as the services that you use, again, if you're actually going through a program that provides counseling for a group of clients, it is hard to try to measure how that has impacted someone's life versus the money used. So if I can take, say, $150 and being able to counsel someone and their life has really been impacted versus using only $50 versus on many people and their life has not changed. And I think sometimes that is the biggest piece. And we see that is how really are we going to measure that? Sometimes you can try to measure that by interacting more with the clients and trying to get an idea of our circle back. And I think I got ahead of myself. So as far as the recommendation goes, provide quarterly financial reports to stakeholders and contributors, which include resources used and where those resources were allocated. This could be done by creating a resource database. And that resource database right now could be what we use now, what we see now in Charlotte as called the Aunt Bertha. That means it's a large database where you have everything from food, you have medical, you have housing, everything is under one umbrella, and you can make actually those recommendations or those referrals. And then they can track where those referrals are actually coming from. During the designated or organization meetings, provide a brief overview of the measurement either by the goal approach, resource-based approach, or internal approach, or the strategic contingent approach. And I'll let you know all of that. And when you think about goal, is how well has the goal been achieved? When you think about resources based, how resources managed. When you look at the internal part of the process, evaluates how well the organization runs. Does the organization actually run the way it should be? And is it productive? And when you look at the strategic contingent, which focuses on how important the role of the key stakeholders. So you're actually making sure that the key stakeholders know that they really are important. You're looking at trustworthiness, you're looking at customer and community views of the services that's provided. You're looking at the employee satisfaction, and you're looking at what your financial returns are. And number 3, we're looking at provide opportunities for the funders and the stakeholders to get a frontline view of the various programs, be able to talk to the clients if they agree to get a better bird's eye view. More interaction. I think when you interact more, then you really get an understanding of what programs are provided. You get a better understanding of the needs. And there's nothing like actually hearing from a client themselves. And some of the risks that we came up with was defunding. We're looking at the community mistrust. If we are not providing the right resources, then the community is not going to trust the organization. Clients' well-being, they all suffer. And the organization's mission suffers. and then the stakeholders' confidence, they're followed. And then you also see that there's a lack of leadership. That's it. And when you're looking at the stakeholders, we are talking about your employees and your volunteers, not just always the funders that's there, for providing the resources. That's it. I'm sorry, guys. I think I talked the whole time.
We have anybody else who would like to uh, give us any information on this one? I think Jackie's done a good job. Okay. Any
Oh,
questions?
Dr. Lamb, I'm sorry. One more thing that we actually came about with what we call circle backs maybe. And one of those recommendations we looked at is probably like each of the month have a connecting story when you connect your purpose for what you're doing. And so when you connect your purpose to whether you're actually somebody that has a housing problem, that's somebody that has a counseling, then when you connect back to purpose, then you know that, okay, we're actually doing what we need to be doing. And
Okay.
also looking at a biannual review.
Yeah. Now, that circle back, what is the official name of that circle back?
Some people do it, call it connect to purpose.
Okay, but what is the circumference of a circle? How many degrees is that?
It gets you right back to
360.
where you started, 360.
That's called a 360 view, right?
60.
Yes.
That is correct. You should remember that from Denison. That is correct. That's absolutely what you do. You have to do those 360s. If you don't, you get mission drift. As we were talking about, or no, excuse me, as I was talking about earlier, I won't throw you under the bus with me. As I was talking about this morning, what in a patronage organization, what has happened? Mission drift.
Yes.
What was the original mission of Gardner Webb? Service to the community and to their students. Pro Deo et Humanitate, for God and humanity, to provide service. They started out, still says that on the it's on all the literature. But what happened? Because we didn't do 360 views, what did our mission drift from to? We started out as a service organization. That's one of the 4 types. We started out as a service organization, but what did we allow ourselves to do? We drifted over to a patronage organization. And so what you have to ask yourself, excuse me just one second, I'm going to have to turn my video off. It's unstable just for a second. We allowed our mission to drift from service over to patronage, where our focus became not our client system, but the people who work there and their convenience. Is that a one-off? Is that something that's far-fetched, that can only happen? Is Gardner Webb an anomaly, an outlier? No. All organizations, especially bureaucratic organizations, tend to become self-serving. The people in them tend to look out for their self-interest. And if we don't do those 360 reviews, what happens? We get mission drift, and we start doing the things that are best for us and our convenience, rather than we drift away from our mission. Unfortunately, that's normal, especially in nonprofits. In a profit business, if you drift away from your mission to turn a profit, what happens? You go out of business. But see, that's what happens. But in effect, The same thing happens in, and you go out of business, you postpone the inevitable. You're not making your budget. You're having to do things that you wouldn't normally do and that don't make good business sense, but you've had mission drift. And so Denison talks about organizational culture. His survey seeks the very first thing that his model is mission, and 360 reviews to make sure that everything we do is in support of our mission. Now, if we're a service organization that goes about teaching and learning, and we don't even have that in our strategic plan, do we have mission drift? Well, of course we do. And so that's what that is. I won't take the time. I could show you how I can put together I have one, a Denison survey in Qualtrics that's really easy for your partnering organization. If you need to look at their mission, vision, involvement within the organization, consistency and adaptability, we can do a Denison survey if that's something you'd be interested in, if that's what you need in your partnering organization. If you need to look at, if they're not clear on their mission, if they don't know what it is, and if they're not doing regular checks, 360 reviews to make sure that they're supporting their vision, then we probably need to do a Denison survey with them. To make sure everybody's on the same page and know where we are. All right, so this was the first of our case studies. This one shows the need for qualitative and quantitative, and that they have to coexist. We can't go with one over the other because different people and different stakeholders need different things, and we have to be able to accommodate that, especially as consultants and leaders. Remember, we're training you to be leaders, and you have to be able to parallel, but you have to be able to understand the value, the efficacy of both qualitative and quantitative, that different stakeholders have different needs. But in the end, although they're parallel and they're two different things, they both have to support the overall mission of the organization. That's the lesson from today's case study. And that you may have to set up, though, you may have to start from scratch. What is important here? And set up the actual, the rubric, and then set up how to collect the data. And then how we know from our collection methodology how we would analyze it. But you may have to sit down with them to figure out what their mission is before you can design a rubric to measure that. That's where you go back to Denison. So it's not as easy, again, to summarize, to be redundant, as I always am. It's not as easy as pushing a button. They could have done that without you. Questions you have about our first case study? Yes, Tawanda.
Okay, so Dr. Lamb, when we look at this qualitative and quantitative, is it possible to have one without the other? In particular, if we look at qualitative, can we not look at quantitative? I think I'm saying that correctly, or vice versa. I'm just curious, can you have one without the other?
Not in organizations. You can in academic disciplines when you're doing theoretical, but in action, remember, we're doing action research. We're not doing theoretical or empirical like you might do philosophical work, dissertation work, where you're doing those kinds of things. We're talking about real life organizations. And in organizations, you can't have one without the other. That is correct.
And you were saying in academic sector, you can have qualitative.
You absolutely can have. Absolutely.
But you don't necessarily need the quantitative. Okay.
In theoretical situations, you can have one or the other. Absolutely. When you're doing theoretical or experimental, doing grounded theory, any of that kind of stuff, when you're doing phenomenologies, when you're doing ethnographies, when you're doing those kind of theoretical and empirical things, yes, you can have one or the other, not a problem. When you're doing organizational work, you have to have both. You absolutely have to have both. You have to have, that's why people say, well, Dale, you know, for our final project, we have to have mixed, we have to have what we're going to do qualitative and what we're going to have to do quantitative. That is correct. And so that closes out. Thank you for Twanda. That leads me into the closure. Any other questions? All right, to close out this section, we need to look then at what the expectation is at the end of this course, that in terms of the methodology. That's, you know, that's the deliverable in this course, is the methodology for your consultancy. So let me share my screen. And again, thank you. That was a great setup, Twanda. She was probably paying attention more than I was. Let me move this out of the way. All right. So the deliverable in this is you've got to have a, what's it say here? The candidate will write a 2 or 3 page exploratory narrative describing quantitative tools associated with his or her selected data. You got to tell us what quantitative data that you need to and will collect, and how you're going to collect that data at your consultancy partnering organization. So that's the first half. Again, it's only 2 to 3 pages. All right. And then you'll do the same thing with qualitative. And then your final presentation on our last meeting together, you will have you can do it orally from your narrative, or you can put together a PowerPoint. Most everybody puts together a PowerPoint where they show us, here's the qualitative and quantitative and how they coincide. This is the data that I'm going to collect at my organization and analyze. That's the heart of what we do. For in real life action research, you have to have both. And that's why the final project is qualitative, quantitative. Remember, we don't mix them. And then we put it together in one this is what I'm going to do qualitative. This is what I'm going to do quantitative. You'll have 15 minutes at the end, maybe a few more minutes than that, but to explain your methodology for your consultancy. Questions about that? Now, for those of you, if any of you, I think one is, if you're doing milestones, those same 2 documents plus that PowerPoint is your, that will be your milestone. It's not something separate. It's those 2 documents, those 2 to 3 page expository narratives that say how I'm going to set up and collect my data qualitative, how I'm going to set up and collect my data quantitative, and the PowerPoint that goes with that, if you choose to do one, that will be what you put as milestone 6.
And so that's what we will turn into you for this. Okay, so we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Okay, sweet.
Yes.
Okay.
All this is, we don't do anything just to waste time. In the end, it's all, that's where we're pointing to in this course. This course is all about, at the end of this course, you should be able to sit down and figure out your methodology for data in your consultancy. And everything's supposed to be practical. I'm not teaching you theoretical calculus here, or the theoretical piece about the calculus. If you want to learn that on your own, some of you are doing that through Salkind, and I'll work with you on that. If you want to sit down and grind out how to do an analysis of variance on Excel, I'd love to do that with you. It's fun stuff. But I'm more interested in the big picture stuff. How are we going to, in reality, in the real world, how do we use this stuff? Again, I want you to use your powers for good and not for evil. I'm telling you all these stories of deception and dishonesty and unethical and bias not so that you can use them, but you can identify them when you go out and work in organizations, because you're going to find a lot of that, because they've had mission drift. That's the Gardner Webb example. You know, I love Gardner Webb. I'm not throwing Gardner Webb under the bus. But what happens is if you're not vigilant and you don't monitor that relationship that your organization, which is called organizational culture, if you don't monitor that relationship to your mission vision, you get drift, because people generally are self-serving. They do what's in their best interest. That's in all organizations, and you have to assess that to begin with. And that's usually the heart of whatever problem that you're trying to help them with out in the partnering organization. They don't have performance metrics. People serve themselves and not the organization or the client system. That's generally why nobody ever calls and pays a consultant because things are going well. The whole purpose here is to know that. So please understand, when I talk about Gardner Webb, I'm not throwing Gardner Webb under the bus. I'm using Gardner Webb. It is a nonprofit. It does have a service philosophy, and that's generally what all nonprofits start with. Now, whether they stay there or not, is up to them and how hard they work to maintain that. But you understand the heart or the core competency of all ALL, all nonprofits, is service. There is some community, some group that they are trying to serve. That's their entire purpose. So they all start out with a service philosophy as a service organization. That doesn't mean they stay there. They have to be vigilant in order to stay there. And even the best ones, and I love Gardner Webb. I love the notion of that of a Christian education in a Christian context. I love the notion that we're doing service. That's one of the 4 areas that we're evaluated in is our service to the university and the community. I love that notion. But at the heart of that is the way that we do that is through instruction, teaching and learning with our students. That I play Santa Claus and partner with an elementary school is all well and good, but you pay me to provide teaching and learning to students. Hopefully I teach and they learn, or we teach and we learn together. That's our core competency. And if you drift from that, you're not providing the service that you're supposed to, and people will stop buying your service. And you have to go from 30% discount rate to 70% to get young people to continue to buy and parents to pay for what you're providing. That discount rate is a pretty good indicator of the health of your organization. If you're having to discount 70%, people don't perceive that they're getting value for their money, and you have to discount it down to what they consider to be value. That's what discount rate is. Do you think that Davidson, Wake Forest, or Duke, the 3 biggest private and most prestigious private schools in the state, do you think that they have to discount their prices? Do you think Harvard discounts theirs? Whether it's true or not, they have perceived value. That's the notion behind all nonprofits, is that they provide a service and that there's perceived value. We have to try to help quantify that or qualify that through qualitative and quantitative data, so that they can see how well or why they're having problems with their funding or with their clients or people choosing them. That's the whole notion here behind what we do. Are you with me so far? Who said that? I believe Don Henley said that from the Eagles. Life in the fast lane. Are you with me so far?
Yep.
Back at 2:30 for the last go round. I'll see you at 2:30. All right, I've got 2:30. It's time to get started again. We'll get done All right, one housekeeping item as we come back online. Today's goal was to cover our first weekend, and we'll get that accomplished. Tomorrow's goal is to get this weekend, both Saturday and Sunday accomplished tomorrow. We'll be able to do that. I'm guessing, I know that y'all have already done case study 16A that was due this weekend. I'm guessing that we haven't completed case study data gathering. Have we completed that one as well? I think so. If we have, we'll do it tomorrow. If we haven't, I don't think we have, we'll do it next time. So don't worry about data case study, get our third case study data gathering. If we don't have it, we'll do it next, our last weekend when we're together. But we will do case study 16A tomorrow. So the thing that we have left today is to go over our chapters in Salkind and make sure that we fit everything through our conversation, or my conversation today. So let's do that, and that will conclude us for today. And so prior to that, again, I'm going to just, again, a housekeeping item. If you haven't done your IRB, you probably need to review chapter 2 under Royce, R-O-I-C-E, that talks about IRB. If you've already done your modules in CITI, then you won't have to do this, but you probably do need to, you know, before you get much further, you need to review these. You need to review this so that you'll have a common knowledge when we're talking about things about bias and deception and those kinds of things. You need to look at this one. So that's just a housekeeping notion here. So let's look at our PowerPoints from Salkind, and let me just kind of go through these quickly. You have questions, unmute yourself and just jump right in. We've covered descriptive. That's where we describe things, levels of measurement, measures of central tendency, mean, median, and mode, standard deviation. Now, one of the things I want to point out about standard deviation. Standard deviation is the average distance from the mean, the adjusted mean, that's n minus 1. That's the number, and that allows for outliers. If there's an outlier in your group, you know, a score that's way off the chart out in right field or left field, that's why we take our number that's in our group and we subtract 1 from it. Now, when we do standard deviation, that's the average distance from the mean. And what that allows us to do is to compare scores on non-similar scales. Now, we all understand that you have a range of scores on a scale. A scale is the starting and the end point. The range is the starting and the end point of the numbers. That, you know, the score on any test can be from 0 to 100. You know, that's that's the scale. The range is from 70 to 100, maybe. You know, the lowest score is 70, the highest is 100. That would be your range. Now, the problem when we try to compare, let's say we've got a test that the scale is 180. You know, 0 to 180, and the scores are clustered between 120 and 180. Well, it's hard to compare those. So we do standard deviations, which measure the average distance from the mean. It allows us to compare scales that are dissimilar. One of the things that unethical or unscrupulous people will do is they will inflate a really big scale, especially people who are trying to sell you a program, or consultants are bad to do this. And when you're looking for some sort of gain, they won't use a small scale. They'll use a big scale and say, you can get 70 points a gain by using this product. Well, if the scale is 300, that sounds pretty good. But if the scale is 3,000, it doesn't sound very good. And so when gain is reported, ethical people and businesses, consultants, report gain in standard deviation. That's where it's most critical for us and our purpose. Again, when we're reporting gain, we should report it in standard deviations. Now, you buy an educational product for a small college, for a public school, private school, you know, for a nonprofit, you buy a product and you're looking for it to improve or whatever you bought it to address. And so the salesperson comes in and they can use an inflated scale, but if we report gain and standard deviations, we understand, we compare apples to apples. Now here's the trick, and I've said all that and was redundant to say this. What if somebody comes in and tells you that their product, you can expect 4 standard deviations of gain? What do you think about that?
You said
What?
a gain?
Of gain, that if you use, I'm selling you this product, now that we're doing all these online things, you know, a lot of businesses, profit and non-profit, have had to go online using Zoom. And there's all these companies out there now that are marketing these platforms and these products to help you deliver whatever you're delivering, whether it be instruction or service online. And you'll make this much gain if you use our product. And they tell you that that if you buy our product, you can get 4 standard deviations of gain. Would you buy that product? Is that enough? How good is 4 standard deviations?
So
Don't you have to know the mean first?
No.
Because you're out of the curve. You're out of the bell-shaped curve.
4 standard deviations is impossible.
Would that mean that you literally have people literally on both sides of the spectrum?
They're off the end of the curve, as Jackie said. 4 standard, we just go up to 3, and only 0.3% can be in 3 standard deviations. 4 is off the curve. It's not impossible. Remember, at the tail of the curve, when it comes down to the x-axis, that the tail of that bell-shaped curve can't actually touch that axis, which would make it something impossible. But 4 standard deviations is so improbable, it would be easier to win the lottery. That's the math. That's mathematical. It would be like 1 chance in a trillion that you could have a 4 standard deviation gain. You certainly wouldn't be replicable in anybody's lifetime that you could get 4 standard deviations of gain. 3 is beyond the realm of believable, but 4 is, you can't say impossible, but it's so highly improbable as to make it impossible. So when we look at that, and that's what standard deviation does, it standardizes everything so that the mean is immaterial. It tells us how far, standard deviation tells us how far from the mean something is. Doesn't matter what that mean is, it just tells us how far. And we understand that you stretch credibility when you get to 3. It's still just, you know, once in a lifetime to see 3, if that often. You will never see 4. Now, so what is the metric that you should adopt in terms of buying a program to get gain? If you don't get at least 1 standard deviation, your results are just basically random anyway. somewhere between 1 and 2 standard deviations. If you're averaging 70 and 1 standard deviation is 5 points on a scale of 100, and your average is 70, if you got something that will give you a 5-point gain to 75, between 75 and 80, then it's worth paying for. If they're telling you that you can expect 15 or more points, then there's some sort of deception going on here. Something has changed. Now, I'll give you an example. There's a county in western North Carolina that a school district, a public school district that has 3 high schools. They do not engage in pupil assignment. They just have attendance boundaries. So since the history of standardized testing came to North Carolina, those 3 high schools have always scored 75% on grade level or proficient, 65 and 55. The 75 is the high school in the county seat that has the doctors, lawyers, and Indian chief children. You know, the businesses, they have the courthouse, they have the hospital. They've always scored 75. The middle class high school down in the other end of the county where all the businesses are centered, where the most of the commerce goes on, they've always scored 65. And then the rural high school that has all of the poorest and most diverse population, they've always scored 55. It was that way for 25 years of standardized testing. The only thing that changed at the middle class high school that always scored 65 was they hired a new principal. 1 semester in, they jumped from 65% proficient to 85. They made a 4 standard deviation gain in 1 semester. Didn't change faculty, didn't change students. The only thing that changed was the principal. Is that believable?
Yes, it is.
So how did he get 4 standard deviations a game? Didn't introduce any new programs, no new teachers, no new students. How did he, the only thing that changed was him. How did he, you know, it was a miracle. It was like the water stain on the wall of the baby Jesus. It was a miracle on that level.
According to what data he used, that's the only way.
Well, I mean, it was standardized state testing. Kids took the state test and he got 4 standard deviations a game. No new teachers, no new staff development, no new programs, no new students coming in. Do you believe him? Do you believe that he got that there wasn't bias, deception, or just out and out cheating involved? Is it possible for that to happen? Can you get 4 standard deviations a game?
I said no.
No. So we know he was cheating. I didn't have to watch him to know. His data told me that he was cheating. So what happened? So what would be the most common way to do that? When we first started, back in the day when we first started testing in high schools, that would be about 1995, 1997. I was a high school principal in Charlotte. Guess what I had to do on the morning we started that end of course testing. I had to get, I was up early anyway, but I had to show up over at Marjorie Alexander Staff Development Center over on West Boulevard. And I got in line with the other high school principals. I think there were 20 high schools at that time, 20 or 25, there's 30 now. Got in line, and what did they hand me? I had to sign my name. They handed me the exams for that day. I had to wheel them out on dolly. We had so many, big high school. And I took them back to school. It had to be me. I couldn't send somebody. Put them in the back of my SUV, loaded the whole thing down, drive back to school. And who was waiting on me in the cafeteria? Teachers. And I handed them their tests, and they went and they administered the test, had their proctors ready, and gave the test. And then what did they do as soon as the test was over? They brought them back to me. And what did I have to do at lunchtime? I had to drive them right back over to Staff Development Center where they had the Scantron machine, and they scanned them. That's how we started out. But then people whined and complained over the years. Oh, that's too much trouble. It's too much work. What about retests, makeup? So what we did, we created a testing window, 14 days. And you went and picked those things up as principal and you carried them back and you would lock them in a secure area so that you could administer them as they needed to be and then get them back. So simply what you do is you take them back, you lock them in, you go on back to your office about your business, teachers go get them and make study guides out of them. And so 2 weeks before the test, what the kids do, you hand them a study guide. It's amazing. It's a miracle. They look almost like the test. And they work on those things for 2 weeks, work all the problems, get all the answers, and then they take the test. My goodness. All is well. It was a miracle. People came from far and wide to see what was going on in that building, and all of them come away. That was the quantitative data for standard deviations. The qualitative, when people come out to look to see what the miracle was, everybody came back scratching their head and other parts of their bodies saying, wait a minute, I don't understand. We didn't see much teaching or learning going on. How's this bunch scoring 85? They've always scored 65, and now they're scoring 85? We don't see it. And, you just don't know what you're looking for. It's the emperor's clothes. The gaslighting started. If you can't see it, then that's the problem with your school. You're not smart enough to see this miracle that's happening. You're one of them people, them doubters. One of them haters that couldn't see the baby Jesus' face in that water stain on the wall over in Italy. You remember that one back several years ago? That was supposedly a water stain with the face of baby Jesus. You just can't see it. You just don't believe hard enough. Well, that went on for 2 years, 4 semesters. Went on for 2 years. See, we sustained the miracle. So, what happens? All of a sudden, we're not going to do the EOC. We're going to do the Common Core exam. That's a national exam. We go back to the original rules back to reliability again, which is about not the test itself, but the administration of the test. Remember, when we're talking about giving a test, there's two things we have to meet: reliable and valid. So we went back to the national exam, Common Core, which has a set of rules in terms of its reliability. So we went back to principal picks up the test the morning of the test, takes it back, teachers give the test, back to be graded at the central office by noon. What do you think happened to their test scores? Everybody else in the county stayed relatively the same. Everybody in the state stayed relatively the same. They scored at the same, in the same positions that they'd already been in. Again, 75, 65, 55. This group of middle class kids passed the upper crust kids and went to 85. What do you think happened when they had to go back to the old type test administration, not on campus for 2 weeks? What happened to their scores?
They went down.
How far did they go down?
They probably went down as low as the 55 range. From the
75, 65, 55. They were at 65 forever. They jumped to 85. They had to go back to the old test administration. They fell to 27%.
I was going to say about, because they hadn't been learning.
They quit. Everybody, the social contract was, you don't bother me, I won't bother you.
Wow.
We'll sit here and text quietly on our phones, cord a little bit. You can read the paper, be on your computer playing solitaire or whatever. And then 2 weeks before the end of the semester, I'll give you the study guide. The fix is in. Well, when they gave them the study guide, it was truly just a study guide 2 weeks before the exam. And then when they got the exam, all the kids were, wait a minute, this is not, I don't know the answers to these questions. 27% on grade level. Now, here's the sad part of all of that. What if we'd never changed exams? We were perfectly willing to let the miracle stand because we didn't want the public blowback. What happens if you invalidate test scores for kids in high school? What does it do to their transcript? What does it do about getting in colleges? What does it do about scholarships? And so the county was kind of caught, I guess, in the middle where they didn't feel like they could say anything because, you know, it would bring into question them and everybody else. I mean, you know, you hired this principal, he did this. Would you not be liable for his malpractice if you're the group that hired him? You know, are you going to fish or are you going to complain? You know the old story of the two fellows that went fishing in a john boat. They fished all morning and didn't catch a thing. And finally, one of them reached into his tackle box, pulled out a quarter stick of dynamite, lit it, and threw it in the water. You know what happens when you do that to the water? What do the fish do? That sonic boom in the water makes them all come to the top, and he got his net out. And the fellow said, you know, he said, oh, I'm telling on you, so that's federal offense, dynamite fish. The fellow says, okay. He reached in the tackle box, pulled out another quarter stick of dynamite, lit it, and handed it to the objecting fellow in the boat and said, here, are you going to fish or are you going to complain? And so the central office was caught in a situation where if we get him, we blow ourselves up. And so they had to let it roll. Too many organizations know that cheating and deception is going on, but they have to let it roll. And so you have to be careful that you're not the one being blown up when you go out and start working in these organizations. It's amazing what you're going to find. But you have to understand that everybody is in the boat. When you find these issues or these problems, you've got to understand the social contract of that organization, that they knew this. They were hoping you wouldn't figure it out or you'd come up with something else other than to fix the actual problem. We'll do anything to fix the actual problem. So they very quietly moved that principal out. But the sad part is they should have moved him out when he got the 4 standard deviations, because we know that theoretically it's not possible for that to happen. But, you know, we were in the boat with him and we didn't want to get blown up. And so we went along. But that's the beauty of standard deviation. It is the most important number that we use when we're trying to assess gain, when we're working with numbers on a quantitative scale, when we're using measures of central tendency, is to understand standard deviation is the average distance from the mean, whatever it is. But in a normal distribution, anything more than 2 is highly unlikely, and 4 is improbable. You've got to understand the mathematics of that. And it's the same no matter what the scale is. That's immaterial. The beauty of the standard distribution of a bell-shaped curve is the scale is immaterial. The range is immaterial. It can be a scale of 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 100 or 1 to 300 or 1 to some odd number like 1. It doesn't matter. Standard deviation does that. It standardizes the deviation from the mean so that it takes into account that it doesn't matter what scale you're working on. Does not matter. Doesn't matter what the numbers are. It puts standard deviations in units of 1, 2, 3, or 4. 3 being highly unlikely and 4 being completely improbable. So for those of you who work in public school, you have EVOS. When they report EVOS, you know, they have a 0 as the baseline, as the mean. They report it that way. And they go standard deviations. 1, anywhere from 0 to positive 199 is standard deviations. That means you met. That's 1 standard deviation. Anything above 2, you've exceeded growth. You're in the 2 standard deviations range. Now, if you go above 3, we got troubles. We suspect cheating or deception. Same way the other way. If you score from 0 to negative 199, you're still within that 1 standard deviation. You've met growth. If you're -2 or more, then you didn't meet growth. Again, they just make it easy. They just call them the mean 0. Again, the actual numbers are unimportant in this in standard deviation. What's important is the number of deviations either side of that mean. That's what's important in a Bell state when we're using descriptive statistics. That what's important is the actual deviations, not the numbers or the range that come with them. That's the thing that you got to take away from chapter 1. Questions about standard deviation. If you understand that, it's a lot harder for people to pull the wool over your eyes. All right. And we know what average is. We know sample. We covered that.
So a lot of times whenever I see presentations or have seen people make presentations and utilize SD at the bottom, that's
Yep.
essentially where we would then, if we see so within that 0 to 2 would be safe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Negative or positive.
Exactly. Exactly. That is correct. 0 to 2 either way is safe. If you're more than, if you're more than that, you've exceeded. And if you're less than that, you haven't met. Then, so on the negative side, you hadn't met, But on the positive side, if you're more than 3, we would have to call that into question.
So in
That's the
order
way.
to understand standard deviation, you also have to know the mean?
Oh, yes, you have to know what it is because it's the average distance from that. So, but for the calculation of standard deviation, yes, you have to know what the mean is and what the scale and the range are. But it's immaterial what those numbers are. And theoretically, it's once you got the standard deviations, you need to know those things in order to calculate your standard deviation. But it works the same whether the scale is 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000. Too many people get hung up on what the scale is. We made 40 points a game, but the scale was 4 million. That's not much. How much gain did you make in terms of standard deviation, which standardizes so you can compare dissimilar scales? That's the oldest trick in the book, is make some ridiculously high scale to make it look like a lot more gain than you actually got. But you can't outrun standard deviation. It standardizes the reporting. It standardizes the scale so they're all the same. Regardless of what they are, it standardizes them to the same. So a standard deviation of gain on a scale of 1 to 1,000 is the same as the standard deviation on a scale of 1 to 100. It's the same amount of gain. That's why you can't get trapped into that. We scored, this much. We got this much gain. You can't get trapped into that because we'll just give you a higher scale than what you're used to, so that it looks like more than it is. That's deception. That's one of the tricks of the trade, to make things look better than they are. But you can't outrun your standard deviation. All right. All right. The mean, if you see here's some basic things that you need to know. You know how to compute the mean. You take all the scores and add them together and divide them by the number, but you divide them by the number minus 1 to take care of any outliers that you might have. X bar is the mean. The sigma sign tells you to add together whatever follows it. X is in each individual score, each individual student score that you got. Little n is the sample size. Big N is the population. If you understand those 5 things, you can read most statistical reporting. You just got to know those 5 things. SD is standard deviation. Variance is big V, which is just the standard deviation squared. That tells you either side of the mean. That's the plus minus that Donald was asking about. That's the variance. And so when we're talking about those EVOS scores from 0 to 2 and 0 to -2, that's the variance. Standard deviation is either side. It's one side. Both sides is the variance. Standard deviation squared, really simple. So if you see a V, that's variance. That means both sides of the mean. Standard deviation is the average distance from the mean. X bar is the mean. Sigma means add everything together that follows it. X is an individual score. Big N's the population, little n's the sample. If you can understand that nomenclature, and it's just that simple, you can understand most all reporting that anybody would give you when they're trying to use calculus to baffle you and to deceive you. If you can understand those designations. Now, we'll talk about correlation, but again, we've talked about P equals 0.5. That simply means that, if you understand that simply means that we're confident that we have less than 5% chance that we arrived at this score by error. Doesn't mean it's powerful or meaningful, or it just means that we feel that this number is significant. That our findings are significant. That simply means that we feel like there's less than 5% error in our methodology. That's all that means. So if you can understand these things, it's pretty easy. All right. And so if you want to use Excel to find you the mean, it's pretty, in median and mode, here are the instructions. It's pretty easy in an Excel spreadsheet to do that. That's one of those things that you can work at on your own. If we were face to face, we would sit and do that. I've tried it. It's almost impossible to do this online. So we won't attempt it today. I had to move this piece out of our instruction when we went online only in the spring. So I won't attempt it. I apologize up front, but trust me, you're better off me not trying to do this with you online. If we were in a classroom environment, I could sit and do this with you, where I can walk around and see your screens. But since I can't do that, we'll just move on. Understanding percentiles. The median is always the 50th percentile. Got quartiles, 25, 50, 75. The middle is always the 50th percentile. Percentiles just take everything and put it on a 100-point basis. Regardless of what the scale is, we put it on a 100-point basis. That's all percentiles do. You know that the most there can be of anything is 100%. And so percentiles just take disparate scales, 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000, 1 to 73, and put them on a 100-point basis. That's all a percentile is. We standardize the scale. That's all a percentile does, is standardize the scale on a 100-point basis. Period.
Dr. Lamb.
Yes.
I see that in the school system, especially with the measure of academic progress, which is called the MAP assessment.
Yes.
I see that the entire CMS keeps talking about percentile, or the student took the test and this is his percentile. And then I always tell parents, as much as percentile is important, you also have to look at the raw score. Did the student grow?
Yeah, you have to look at, did they grow? The reason why we report in percentiles on MAP data is because generally there's a really odd number of items on those tests, like 180. And so to make it understandable, and see, here's the thing. Every test that we give doesn't have the same number, even in the same discipline. Some tests we give in math have 120, some have 130, and percentiles is a way for us to standardize that where we can compare regardless of the number of items. But you're right, what you're looking for is growth. You know, did your child make growth?
Yeah, the rich score.
Yeah, is the growth. Now, the reason why that's important is when we do growth for a kid, we compare him to him. We don't compare him to some other child.
Exactly.
We have a unique and identifiable score for him that shows a year's growth. And so, thank you, Buku. You have set me up for my next.
Great. Yeah,
And
when
so
we go
I
to
will
IEP
explain- I
meetings,
will
there's
explain
always
EVOS.
mention of that. Sorry, Doc.
No, I'm interrupting you.
You know, I was saying that when we go to IEP meetings,
Mhm.
there's always a mention of that, the student percentile. And I said, this is just a comparison with the other students, but
Yes,
let's look at the individual effort of that student. How
that
did he
is
do on the
correct.
test? Yeah.
You know, comparative accountability was built so that parents could brag at the country club that their kids beat some other kids that didn't have as many advantages as their kids.
Yeah.
Again, it's back to the buying of the indulgences. And so growth accountability is about what you did with the kid. It's about what you did with them and not about who you got. So here's what we're talking about. For 20 years, now 30 years, we dumped all the test scores of kids in a big database, and we did analysis of variance. And we looked at what independent variables of that child led to the dependent variable, which was the test score. And so we took all that data and we did a linear regression where we took all of those independent variables and we added them together and those dependents and got the independent variable, which was the test score. All right, so here they are. Now, I don't put this out because people think this is racist or discriminatory. Now, this is what the data tells us, that the amount of variance that each of these things contributes to a kid's test score. Race is 30%, mother's education 15%, father's income is 15%, teacher is 10%, school is 5%, school district is 5%, grade is 5%, age is 5%, gender 5%, previous test score is 5%. So we take that and convert it into an algorithm, and this is how it goes. This is an actual case. The third grade math EOG has 180 questions. So the total raw score that so again, the scale is 0 to 180. The question is how many questions out of 180 does this kid have to answer correctly to show a year's growth? How would we compute that? Well, again, we know how much variance that each of these variables contributes to a kid's test score. And so we've created an algorithm. That's what SAS does that runs EVOS. And so here it is. Jamar's a third grade student in Charlotte Mecklenburg. His independent variables are, he's black, so he gets 20 out of 30 points. If he's white, he'd get 30 out of 30. And if he was Hispanic, he'd get 15 out of 30. Now, we don't assign those randomly. That's what data tells us. His mother has less than a high school diploma, so he gets 5 points out of 15. If she had beyond a 4-year degree, he would get 15 points. No father in home, so 0 out of 15 on father's income. If his income was in excess of 150, it would be 15. Why is mother's education and father's income so important? Who reads to kids? What we call lap time. That'd be the mother. And the reason she can do that is if dad makes enough money, she stays at home with the kid. We know that. Teacher, we assume to be 10. That's if you got a really good teacher. District, if it's a high wealth district, 5. If it's low wealth, it's 2. The individual school, Billingsville was a takeover school, so it was a 0. If it was a high growth school, it'd be 5. He's in the fifth, grade is 5 because he's not a repeater. This is his first time in 3rd grade. However, he was developmentally delayed, didn't start school until he was 6, and so he gets 3 out of 5 points. Gender, 5 for a male, because it's a math test. Females get 4. Be the opposite way around if it were a reading test. Girls do better on reading, boys do better on math. I don't say it has to be that way, but that's what scores tell us. Previous test scores 2. He was not on grade level according to M-class or MAP data coming out of 2nd grade. And so his equation looks like this. 20 plus 5 plus 0 plus 10. So this is his algorithm. Plus 5 plus 0 plus 5 plus 3 plus 5 equals 2 equals 55%. We multiply 180, the total raw score, by the 55%. So Jamar has to get 99 out of 100 correct in order to show a year's growth. It takes into account who Jamar is. That's the way it works. We started with an analysis of variance, and we can do that because the 3rd grade math test, every one of those questions has a right answer. This is quantitative. We can do an analysis of variance, and we look at the correlation of these variables here to his test score, and it gives us a percentage of how much variance each one of these contributes to his test score. We convert that to a linear regression where we add them all together. We do an algorithm where we give points up to 30 based on race. White's 30, black's 20, Hispanic 15. That's the ratio that they score on tests. I'm not saying it's right, but that's what it is. And so we do that calculation, and that's how we determine whether that kid made a year's of growth or not. The problem with comparative accountability, as Buku pointed out, is we're comparing this kid to a kid over at Hickory Grove or over at Ardrey Kell, and they don't have the same chance. They don't have the same opportunity. It's not equitable to compare those kids together. This way, we only compare Jamar to Jamar. And so, but we have to know our business. Don, you got a question?
It was more of a comment, like when we're asked to come into places to sort of reveal some of these things, it may not be about EVOS data.
Yeah.
As I'm assuming, before you even go, you sort of prep by knowing what data is already out there.
Right.
And so you sort of know the truth behind it a little bit, but you don't necessarily, how do you approach it if you know that it's horrible, but you can't necessarily say that because otherwise they're going to run you out.
Yeah. It's just like when you're dealing with parents, what you'd like, when you have kids that misbehave, what you'd like to say is, or don't do well, you'd like to say to the parent, the kid's problem, the problem with this kid is that he's an idiot and it's hereditary. You want to say that, but you can't. And so what you're saying is when you walk into these places, well, here's the part that you focus on, Donna, when you walk into these schools. Everything else is controlled for except that teacher. We assume that you're going to get that full 10 points. And if we're not making growth, it's because everything else is controlled for. Everything else is factored in. So The only thing we can control is the people who work here. Again, getting professional development. If you're, you don't always get when you, as a leader of a school organization you don't always inherit the best employees. You don't always hire the best ones. They're not always available, or you can't afford them. It's your job to make them the best ones. And so that's what you walk in when I walk into a school. I do this all the time, or I don't now. I don't walk in. I do it online. But when I'm asked to go in to assess what, look at their numbers and tell them what their problem is, Jeff does one half. He does the, this is how you employ it. I do the, this is how it works. We've got a school coming up that we're going to be doing in December down at Central Middle School in Whiteville, North Carolina. We're going to be doing in December, we're going to be working with this on this. And what we tell them from the very beginning is, this is not hopeless. We can learn how to overcome this. Professional development, becoming empowered as better classroom teachers, we can fix this problem. It's not about who we get, it's about what we do with them. We can't blame the victim. We can't blame the kids here. We can fix this problem. But we're, and the secret is getting the right teachers teaching the right things. EBOS tells us that. Some teachers work better in some subject matter than others, and some teachers work better with certain groups of kids. But all teachers do better if they use best practices. We know what those 9 best practices are. Marzano's, 9 best practices for teaching. We know what they are, and we're going to help you with that. We're going to make sure that you're teaching, the right subject and the right kind of kids, and then we're going to make you a better teacher as well, because it's all about delivery. We don't debate what content we teach. In school business, our job is delivery. Go right ahead, Don.
So in essence, when you were talking about the social contract, when we go into a place, you ask them we had a case study about this, like, what is it that you can control? Yeah. What is it that you cannot control? And then from there, you're able to then, based off of what people tell you or what comes up in the surveys, you're able to say, well, you can't necessarily control for this, but you can control for this. And if you do these activities or what have you, it could potentially help to change your outcomes.
That's the whole notion of EBOS, is the only thing that you can control is the teacher. Everything else, it comes to you that way. But we've controlled, we have factored that into the algorithm. We don't expect every kid to score the same. Their score is a function of their variables. That's what analysis of variance is. That score is a function of the variables that contribute, and teacher is one of those variables, and it's the only one that we control. Don't blame who we get. Let's work with who we got. We can control that. We can control what we do. We can't control who we get. Schools and prison, you don't get to pick who you get. But we can control what we do with them. See, the first thing you have to overcome when you go to schools that aren't performing is they want to blame who they get. It's not my problem, it's external. Nothing I can do. Well, there is something you can do. You can be better at delivery, teaching and learning. Again, what do they do at Jones Sausage? They make sausage. What do you do in school? You teach kids. You can get better at that. If you get better at that, you will get your growth. Now, it won't, that doesn't mean you can compete with the country in an absolute sense. In comparative accountability, you might not be able to compete with the country club school, but you can do better than you're doing now if your teachers do better, and kids can make growth, and that's what you're interested in. Now, if you go to a Title I school, especially someplace like Kirkman Park in High Point, or Kimsey Park in Winston, or Mary C. Williams in Wilmington, that's in a Section 8 housing development, that is generational poverty. They've never even known anybody that has a job. You can get growth out of those kids, but you can't expect them to, the Mary C. Williams, to score the same as Parsley Elementary over on the rich side of town. In comparative terms, they're not going to score the same, but you can get growth just as easily out of the kids at Mary C. Williams as you can at Parsley. That is correct. You control the things that you can, that you have control over. And everything else in the EVOS equation is controlled for you. We've taken it into account. It's no more, we say, well, this is an oversimple. It is simple. If you understand the concepts, it's fairly simple. Now, the problem you get into is when you go to work as a consultant, they want you to be able to score the same at Mary C. Williams as you do at Parsley. We don't have the same raw material to work with. We don't have the same capacity. We'd have the capacity to get kids to grow from where they are, but we can't, we're at different starting points at Mary C. Williams and Parsley. We can still get growth, but we're not going to take the group at Mary C. Williams and be competitive with Parsley's group in terms of absolute numbers on a scale. I mean, that's the way the world works. Bigger, faster, stronger beats slower, weaker, smaller. That's how the world works. We understand that in athletics, but for some reason we don't want to acknowledge that in academics. Yes, I can get a year's growth out of pretty much any school now, but I can't make you. I can't change who you are. I can't change your demographics. That would change the scale that you're on.
But then that shows that within the school system and not in the school system is that then we need to make sure that our focus is changing. And then when someone does say something about students and where they are, it's just not about that. Right now, we're making sure that we have growth, that each individual student is growing.
That's what's important.
That's important.
Yeah, because if you start focusing on absolute and comparative, what you start doing is trying to exclude and run people off, and you make schools inhospitable so that they'll move out. What's the purpose of public school? Is to educate the great unwashed, the general population. We had private schools in this country before we had a country. Harvard dates back into the 1600s, folks. What's the purpose of public schools? Not in the Constitution. It's in the preamble of the Constitution that states may provide public education. And the whole notion is we don't want to run off the very people that we're designed to help. But that's what happens when we get stuck on comparative accountability. I don't want them kids. Now, I know that lately in our political landscape in this country, it's become popular to say just the most outrageously racist and homophobic and discriminatory thing, as long as we say, before we say it, we say, but I'm not a fill in the blank, racist, misogynist, or homophobe. But we can say, I understand that, but we are our actions. I thought we were better people than we are. The worst has kind of come to the top in our society as of late. And it's affected our schools back to the point where we want to start comparing unequal groups. We're not allowed to do that statistically. Remember, we have to have equal groups if we're going to do comparison. It goes back to sampling. We pull out the poorest kids and you pull out the richest kids. Those are not equal samples. They're not neither one is representative of the population. Again, all life is population and sample, folks.
So Dr. Lamb, now I understand, being in the North Carolina Association rep, why teachers were so upset about EVOS, because their supplement was tied to those games. Before I would listen, but now looking at how it, what the algorithm is, I understand, and it's disheartening.
You can make growth with any kids because you don't, you know, I used to tease my wife. Right over this way, right across the street, was Davidson College, the Harvard of the South. They had a little boutique middle school there, IB, International Baccalaureate, the highest level, the most rigorous. 240 of the best and brightest kids in the district. You had to be careful not to let them out in the sunlight too much because their glasses were so thick they'd burn stuff up like magnifying glasses. We're talking about little Einsteins. And so I used to tease her all the time, but the most important person, in the organization over there at the IB school that was in a lab school on the campus of Davidson College, the most important person was the custodian. As long as you got the front door open every day, the scores would walk right in, whether you taught them or not. Now, didn't get growth, but comparatively, they were all fours or they wouldn't be there to begin with. You had to have all fours in your standardized testing or you couldn't get in. So comparative accountability wise, just get the door open. Now, on the other part, on the other part of that you have to get growth out of it. So on an absolute scale, yes, they score higher than the kids at Billingsville, but you can still get growth. To get growth at Davidson IB, if they had 180, they might have to get 175 questions out of 180 to show a year's growth. Not easy to do either. Kid at Billingsville's only got to get 99. They both made a year's growth, but it's individualized. That's the whole notion behind EVOS. Now, as it was pointed out a minute ago there, teachers don't understand this. That's why we go out and we work to get them to understand. Why do you think that districts don't want to explain this and get into this discussion? Because when I pop up that about race being the most important thing and father's income and mother's education, what do people automatically assume? That I'm some cracker, some bigot. That's what it looks like when you explain that. And hardest thing in the world is to prove a negative. I am not a. And so people don't want to get into this discussion, but it's simply again, data has no value, positive or negative, good or bad. It's just data. It's just numbers. This is what the numbers tell us. We've got 30 years of test score data that tell us that 30% of the variance in a white kid's in a kid score white kid is 30, but only 20% of the variance is for black kids and 15 for Hispanic. That's not got anything to do with what color their skin is or that. It has to do with data. But when you talk about this out in public, why do you think they hired a private firm to do this that can say that our algorithm is proprietary and we don't have to explain it or tell you what it is? Because they wanted some cover. If it was the DPI had done this, and they had plenty of people that could do this, then they would have had to explain it. It had been public information, and Lord have mercy, somebody would have burnt their house down. You can't say these things out of context. I can work with you folks as doctoral students high enough level to understand what we're doing. But now I wouldn't have started out with this morning. At least, even I'm smart enough to know that I've got to set up before I get you to this place. This is normally at the end of the second meeting, and that's where we are at the end of the second, because we've covered this. But you've worked through the Salkind book. You understand these concepts now. You take this for what it is. It's data. It's reporting of data. It's just not got anything to do with a political agenda or bigotry or racism or any of that. This is numbers. And there's mathematical concepts behind this.
So I remember when we were trying to figure out at that time, which I learned later, it didn't really matter what we said, the governor's education agenda. And I proposed a give me the top 5% of schools and the bottom 5%.
Right.
And let's look at the top 5% performers and the bottom 5% performers at each one of those schools, and then actually see what it is that they're doing to make that happen. Well, if we did that, it would expose things that people didn't want to be exposed about what was happening to the bottom 5% at the top 5% schools, and vice versa, on how you
Well,
make.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're
Oh,
exactly
no.
right. You know,
And
over at the white school, the top 5%, you know, my wife taught over there the 15 years that it was open. What kind of teachers do you think they had?
national board certified, experienced, two
My
dual
wife,
household.
you know, my wife, undergraduate, master's in technology, 6-year in curriculum and instruction, nationally board certified, AG certified, 36-hour AG certification program, IB certified, everything that you can think of. You know, the best teacher you've ever seen, but every room in the building had that teacher in it. She was recruited specifically to work at that school. She worked 12 months because in the summer, she worked in the C&I department designing the staff development for the new teachers coming in, middle grade social studies. She stayed in the classroom because she loved kids, but they compensated her well. She made the top of the salary range for teachers. She made more than elementary school principals to teach there. That's who you put there. Now, what did the folks look like at the bottom 5%? Lateral entry, Teach for America,
Emergency permits.
residency license, people that couldn't pass the praxis, teacher assistants, people with, emergency provisional, just like in Charlotte, come in wearing the same clothes they had on yesterday with 15 bar stamps on their hand. But just a bunch of young kids that want to keep the party going. After college, come to a party town like Charlotte, keep it going. Keep the party going. That's who teaches in those schools. A lot of lateral entry, a lot of Teach for America that can't find the building. That's who you get to work with them. That's why we don't want to talk about these things. But that's the thing that we can control is the teacher quality. I can't control their race, their income, their mother's education. I can't control any of that stuff. Only thing I can control is the teacher. But what do? We put our best teachers in quotes with our best kids. And we put our people who we call teachers loosely. I would argue that they aren't really teachers. They're just placeholders. We put them with the lowest kids. And then we're surprised that they don't make grade. Amazing. I'm shocked. Who would have thunk it? But that's where we are. That's why we are where we are. Our numbers tell us that. We know. I can read the numbers. I can tell you but there's so much political drift now. In 1974, Public Law 94-142 was passed, which said we had to educate handicapped kids. I didn't go to school with handicapped. Well, we have one here and there. They help the custodians. But other than that, but by the time I was teaching and was a principal, we had mentally handicapped, learning disabled kids in school. So during my years in administration, the people who came in and complained were the parents of the exceptional children, the EC kids, that they weren't getting what they were promised by the law. Those days are gone. Guess who comes in and complains now in school every day? Regular ed parents. These kids are keeping my kid from getting what they're supposed to have. I don't want that kid in my kid's classroom. I'm not a bigot. I'm not a racist. And then they go on to say the most bigoted racist thing that you can imagine, as if they've indemnified themselves by saying, I'm not a. That's allowable now in our public discourse. We've got to get back to the point where, when you come in and say those bigoted racist things, that we toss you out on your ear. But we don't. we allow those people to do that. And under the guise of, as long as I say I'm not, put a disclaimer on it, it indemnifies me. And until we call that out for what it is, it's only going to get worse in terms of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer in terms of teacher quality. That's what the data tells us. Again, it's all about data. So what have we done in this country? We've taken, and unfortunately in the COVID era, we've taken it to the extreme. We now have discounted intelligence, knowledge, science, math. All we have to do now is believe it, and that makes it so. We don't have to have any data. We don't have to have any proof. We can ignore data and proof. As long as I believe it, that makes it true. And so we now have all these crazy things swirling around, like if I have a poor kid in my kid's class, that makes my kid learn less. Or if I have a minority kid or an exceptional child in my kid's class, that makes my kid dumber. And we have people who espouse that garbage on a daily basis now and are allowed to get away with that because that's part of our national discourse. If I believe it, that makes it true. Anecdotal, again, back to anecdotal. If I believe that that bird drinking that water is what made him fly, then that's my truth. And that I take Buku up and throw him off the roof and he don't fly, that data does not change my opinion. I still believe that drinking water will make you fly. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to add up. The equation doesn't have to balance in today's discourse. And that's what you fight as a quantitative person every day. We don't believe the numbers. You've done something to, you've introduced bias. You've done something bad. So last Thanksgiving, be a year ago next month, last Thanksgiving, we did a little action research at Gardner Webb. So until this year just passed, this past September, we had never had Labor Day as a holiday. So the new president came in and there was a lot of complaints that teachers cancel class on Monday for Labor Day and that teachers weren't teaching on Friday, and that basically that what we already knew, that teaching was not a priority at a teaching institution. Imagine that. And so the Office of Institutional Effectiveness rounded up a few of us and said, we're going to do a data collection experiment and we'll run the numbers. So we ran out from, what is that called, Donald? That classroom manager, what is it called? Meeting room manager, that you can tell what every classroom on campus, what's in it every day of the week and every hour. We have that system scheduled, and so the folks from Institutional Effectiveness downloaded all of those and gave us. So I covered what's the name of the music building right next to Craig? I covered it, and Jeff did Craig, and Hamilton and Tubbs did. We all had a building that we were assigned to, and so what we did on the Thursday, wait a minute now, the Monday, and the university gave Wednesday as a holiday on the week of Thanksgiving and said, all right, we'll give you Wednesday, so you might have to travel. So, Thursday and Friday you have off, but we want you to come and work Monday and Tuesday. That way, if it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, you've met that week. And if it's a Tuesday, Thursday class, you've met that week. So the expectation from the provost, put the email, you'll teach your classes on Monday and Tuesday. So without telling anybody, we printed these things out, these logs, and we started early in the morning until late at night, whatever. And we went and checked every room in that building on that hour to see if that class was meeting in that room. Every campus building, we covered every one of them. What do you think we found, Donald? Donald's still.
It was me. It was empty.
We had more that didn't meet than did. Let me say that again. We had more classes that didn't meet that did, after being told, not indirectly, but directly, to be in your class Monday and Tuesday. No bueno. Nobody showed up.
But also, too, there was no recourse.
Well, so what happened is we turned the data in. I mean, absentee rate was about 70% for the university. 70% of the classes didn't meet. So that's 260, 280, 300 classes didn't meet. And so the undergraduate faculty, the mafia, they launched a disinformation campaign immediately and wrote a manifesto against us that we had misrepresented the data. No, what percent met and which ones didn't. That our methodology was flawed. And I said, I'm not even the smartest fellow in the conversation, but I can open the door and look in the room and see if there's anybody in there. That was our method. They wanted us to explain our methodology. We went to the room and opened the door and looked. It's kind of like the same way you determine the gender of a cat. You lift his tail and look. Well, we went to the door and opened the door and looked in the room. If there was somebody in there, then you were having class. If they weren't, you weren't having class. That's pretty simple methodology. And you would have thought that we had burned the place to the ground. They used every spurless argument in the world. And in the end, you didn't show up and teach your classes. But we were the bad guys for pointing that out. How dare you? How dare you point out? But used every argument. Now, the thing was, they made sure they pulled people from the grad school who teach graduate statistics to do this so that our methodology couldn't be questioned, but they did anyway. But that's what you're going to face when you present your numbers, your data, your truth. You're going to have people that want, that want you, they'd like to shoot you twice. Once wouldn't be enough. That's what you're going to face. So you got to make sure that you have limited your bias, that your ethics, you're above board, that you are above reproach in your methodology. That you can answer what you've done, because when you present your numbers, you're going to gore somebody's ox. You need to understand that. You're going to be a missionary and not an evangelist. And that won't go well. You know the difference between a missionary and an evangelist. An evangelist, like Billy Graham, takes the word to people who want to hear it. He fills stadiums all over the world. A missionary takes the word to people that don't want to hear it, and sometimes end up boiled in a pot. Literally.
Dr. Lamb, that reminds me when I did the Master's in Executive Leadership Studies, and we had to evaluate, assess the school improvement.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of upset people because, the qualitative data didn't come out like they thought it should.
Well, they thought it ought to. I'm a good person, or I have this status in the community, and the data ought to reflect that. Yeah. I am because I am, and my data ought to be good because of who I am. And so we've covered range, standard deviation, and we've covered variability, range, standard deviation, and variance. Remember, standard deviation is the average, and variance is both sides. It's just the standard deviation squared. It's either side of the mean. The range is, the range of scores on the scale. Pretty easy stuff here. Again, the symbols, we've already covered those. And the last one, frequency distributions. That's how we report answers to a survey. Again, the only thing that we can do with survey data is run a chi-square to make sure that we don't have an outlier. You know, we can shape it. We can look at the distribution to see that it's normal. And that's all this is all that a chi-square does. It takes and plots your data to make sure that it's randomly distributed so it looks like this. That's all it does. You know, and so the only other thing I want to make sure that you understand that is not intuitive in our business is a negative skew is good and a positive skew is bad. When we talk about a skew, a bell-shaped curve is supposed to be symmetrical with the mean with the mean right in the middle. And if our distribution of scores is normal, the mean, median, and mode will all be the same, right in the middle. Now, when we get a positive skew, that means that we have way too many scores behind the mean or below the mean. When we get a negative skew, that means we're no longer symmetrical. One side of the curve is bigger than the other. A negative skew means that we got more scores above the mean than we would expect to get. That's the only thing, is you get tripped up on that one from time to time, and your critics will kill you over that one. A positive skew is bad, a negative skew is good. A negative skew means you have more scores above average than below. A positive skew means you have more scores below average than above. So just remember that. But to get back to what Angela said, yeah, people don't want to hear the truth. My station in life, my data ought to reflect my station in life. I'm a good person. But you see, in life, we judge ourselves by our intentions. We judge others by their actions and outcomes. I intended to go to church on Sunday. My scoundrel neighbor, he didn't go. I didn't go either, but I intended to go, so I'm a better person than him. That's the way it works in the world. We judge ourselves, and too many organizations judge ourselves on our intentions, and we're good people. You know, we meant to give them the service that they deserve. We meant to love all those little dirty kids with snotty noses. We meant to. We you know, but that we didn't deliver to them what they were supposed to get. You know, we'll hold somebody else accountable, but we won't hold ourselves. We judge ourselves by our intentions. And when the data doesn't come out like it's supposed to, because we did the right things. Again, the right thing is the usual customary, what we've always done. Not understanding that the right thing gets results. The thing that you do all the time is just the usual customary practice. But we've got to tie practice to performance. Let me say that again. Our job as consultants, as leaders, school people, non-school, public, is to tie performance to practice. Practice to performance. This is what we did, this is what we got. The one that we can change is what we did. It's our practice. We've got to do better. Now that we know, if you know better, you'll do better. That's the assumption here. But Angela's right. Too many people don't want to know, because that would make them have to do better and do different. So it's easier to discount, to argue, complain, whine, write a manifesto, claim, you know, bad methodology. Anything in the world except you didn't show up and teach your classes. And that's why, in general, you're having to give a 70% discount rate to get people to come. They just can't perceive the value of what they're getting. When you have, you know, 16 weeks and you're supposed to meet 32 times a semester, and you don't show up but 14 times to teach the class, people don't want to pay for that. And here's the thing, the world will beat you home because of social media and these ranking systems and all that stuff. You can't not serve people now and people not know. They have outlets of how they can get their social justice and complain. Just like me, Chevrolet sent me a survey wanting to know how well that dealership did on my service. You know, that's the thing that you need to understand. I got a survey 3 weeks ago. My niece got married. I went up, stayed one night, quarantined in the hotel, did my class on Saturday from the hotel, left after my wife went to do the ladies' day, the hair, the nails, and all that. I left and before the wedding, because I don't do that's too high risk for me. But we stayed at a Holiday Inn Express. You know, as soon as I got back, they sent me the service as a, you know, the Qualtrics survey as a gold card member. And I was not kind. I wasn't ugly. I said, you know, you charged me full price. I expected full service. The business center was closed. No breakfast. The hand sanitizer stations wasn't working. Nobody was enforcing masks. Somebody was smoking on my floor. You cut my internet off after 3 hours, said my metered connection that was up. I'd used all I was getting that day. But now you didn't bother to charge me a reduced rate. You charged me for all the stuff that you didn't provide for me. And then they called me and I said, I'm not going to argue with you. Well, what can we do to fix it? Well, you can't now. You know, you
So
should have thought
Dr.
about this
Lamb.
beforehand. And so, but the point of that story, that long story is that the news will beat you home. If you're not providing service, if you're not providing what you intended, your client system will know it before you know it sometimes. Because you, and the reason why is because you choose not to know it. You're self-delusional. And that's the part of consultancy that's the hardest, is they really know what the problem is. They're hoping you'll find something else that'll be an easier solution. We'll do anything to fix the problem, but what we know we need to do. You know, we know that we need to meet our classes, and we know that we need to be prepared when we start, that we've got Blackboard filled out and that we grade. You know, here I am after finding out that Blackboard's not been working, but I finally got it working, hopefully. So that's this, to end up today. I've gone through all your discussion boards. I'm up through chapter 8 in Salkind, putting your grades in one at a time, but I will grade your work as it comes in. I think we have this problem solved now in our shells. So if you put work in today, trust me, I graded it the day that it came in and commented on it. But, you know, again, you know, we know that we should do better at Gardner Webb on Blackboard. We just don't care. Now that we have more users because of online, it's not working. But the person that we call, he doesn't, you know, his usual response when we call him, Jeff had to call him Thursday or Friday, is, huh, that's never a good sound from the guy that's supposed to be fixing your problems. And then his only solution is switch browsers. But again, he has no expertise, but again, he needed a job. But he knows less about Blackboard than we do. We know that as an institution, but we're not willing to fix it because we'd have to hire somebody that actually knows something. And, you know, our friend Bob needs a job. That's what you're going to face as a consultant. Thank you for playing along today. I'm sorry it's so long and boring. It's usually a little better when we're face to face, but I appreciate what you're doing. We'll meet tomorrow at the same time. We'll do 16A. We won't do day together, and we'll move it to the end. And so now, questions, comments, concerns. We'll move to that part of the program now. I'm done.
Dr. Lamb?
Yes.
I have a question. It is regarding the Salkind test. On the weekend schedule that we have highlighted the Salkind test, chapters 2 through 6 optional, 9 through 12 optional, and 14 through 21 are optional. So it's what it is. It's optional. We don't have to do those.
Absolutely. You
So
can dive in as deep as you want to into Geekville. or not.
Okay. Okay. So let me see if I can go back and look. Okay. So the test for chapters 1 and 1A, we are responsible for.
Yes, you need to take, the one is just a general knowledge of the terms from today. It's really simple. And the 1A is that you basically can open up Excel and know the difference between a form and a function. That's it. As long
So
as you know
the
that,
Mhm.
and you don't
So the
have to
only
make a
two-
certain score.
Okay. So the only two we're responsible for is 1 and 1A. The rest of them are optional.
That is correct.
And then in regards to Royce, we're responsible for that 100 question eval next month on the 14 chapters.
That's correct,
The
because
very end.
that is on Royce.
Mhm.
That's because we don't have any discussion board questions on that one. And again, that it's a general knowledge. It's not, it's not going to be deep and dirty, but we don't have any discussion board questions on Royce. And so you do that one to see where you are. Kind of gives you, it's more of a gauge of where you are than anything else. It's not that. And then the final exam, again, that's, take it from me. It's 20 questions that I would hope that if somebody asked you if you had this course, that you'd be able to answer about this course, about what you've learned here. The most important stuff. There's no calculus, there's no problems, there's no math in it. It's just, do you understand the concepts of what we've covered? Again, there's no particular score you have to make on it. I generally take it, as an Alzheimer's test. I take it at the beginning of every semester, to see how much but it's stuff that, you don't have to sit and grind on. You don't have to sit and, did you get the big picture ideas? Do you understand? Let's see. I can take it in about, let's see, let me look right here. It's 20 questions. Let's see, go back here. I think I thought I put that in. Anyway, I can take it in 4 minutes or less and get all 20 of them right. No smarter than I am. It's not going to be a long and involved test. Let's see. The final exam. I mean, it's going to ask you things like this really simple stuff from today. Let me get that out of the way. Which methodology emphasizes objective measures and the statistical, mathematical, and numerical analysis of data collected through tests, polls, questionnaires, surveys? Qualitative, quantitative, correlational, or statistical? What kind of method? There's only two types of methodology, qualitative and quantitative. Which is it?
Qualitative.
It's quantitative. Surveys,
Quantitative.
questionnaires, tests.
Qualitative.
It's quantitative.
Quantitative.
It's numbers.
Surveys. You know, when I think
Quantitative.
surveys, I'm thinking questionnaire.
Remember, I told you, surveys are the exception. Although their opinion, we do count them as quantitative, just like tests. Remember, but we can't treat them the same way as test data when we analyze them. We can only use chi-square. But they are quantitative.
There we go. I was just about to say, wait a minute, we're saying quantitative.
All
but
right.
not quantitative.
Which methodology consists of observation, interview, and documents? That would be qualitative. And remember, it's important to know the difference because how we collect the data varies, and how we analyze the data is we have a set of rules that we ethically have to follow. We can't do an analysis of variance on survey data. We can only do chi-square. We can't interview 6 people out of 1,100 to determine how effective staff development is. We need to look at the test score of the kids of those 1,100 teachers. We can't try to do a quantitative assessment of how effective staff development is and use qualitative methodology and ask our friends. There are certain rules that go with these. What means that results from testing or experimenting is not likely to occur randomly, by error, or by chance. Again, that's statistical significance. That means that we feel confident about there wasn't error in our technique. It has nothing to do with how important what we find or how big or little it was. It just speaks to error. Statistical significance. Again, we think it means something important. It doesn't. It just speaks to our technique. Results from testing and experimenting that are statistically significant can be strong or weak. In general, the larger the effect size you have, the more likely that the difference will be meaningful. What is defined as an educated guess? What's a swag? It's hypothesis. And the reason why we refer to it as swag is why? Because it is wild, it is stupid, and it can be dangerous. We have to be careful that we don't take Buku up on the roof and throw him off, because we've hypothesized that drinking water makes you fly because we saw a bird do it. We have to convert that hypothesis into a research question. And when we do that, then the rules of ethics and methodology apply. We got to find a way to measure that ethically without using deception, harm. You know, we kind of figure if we throw Buku off the roof, that might harm him. We shouldn't do that. Don't throw Buku off the roof. That's why a hypothesis is a swag that has to become a research question. And then when it becomes a research question, ethical concerns, no pay, no deception, all those things kick in when it becomes a research question. We can hypothesize on anything. We're just spitballing, thinking up crazy stuff. But then we have to put that into a usable form that has rules, has ethical rules, don't cause any harm. How do I know the test scale instrument that I use works every time I use it?
Reliability?
Reliability. It works the same every time with everybody. How do I know that the test scale or instrument I use measures what I think it's supposed to measure?
Validity.
That would be validity. Which of the following is not a measure of central tendency? We know that's mean, median, and mode. Standard deviation is variability. A normal or Gaussian distribution, that's the bell-shaped curve, is referred to as what? The bell-shaped curve.
The bell-shaped curve.
Pretty simple. Correlation is a measure of the strength of the relationship between two variables. The statistical term blank is defined as a relationship between two random variables that makes them statistically dependent. It refers to rather a general relationship without specifics of that relationship being mentioned. Is not necessarily a causal relationship.
Association.
That would be correlation. Is that right?
I thought it was association.
It is. There you go. I'm sorry. I think you said, yes, that's association, because it doesn't tell us the strength or what the nature of that relationship is. If it told us the strength or the nature of that relationship on a scale of -1 to +1, it would be what? Correlation. But this says, does not tell us what that relationship is. So if we go from weak to strong, we have association. That's usually from qualitative, from talking to people. Correlation from statistical analysis, that's quantitative. That mean, and then cause, we're not looking in quantitative terms. We don't look for things. You don't have to have causation. We don't. That's not what we're trying to prove, because there's always outliers. We're looking for strong correlation. You can't prove causation. If you're interested in examining how one variable changes in relationship to another, which of the following descriptive statistics would you want to use? I'd want to use correlation. If you have a positive relationship, when you get more of one, you get what of the other? You get more as well. If you have a negative correlation, when you get more of one, what happens? You get less of the other. So we want to know, if I get more of this, what will it do to this one over here? If I get more money, how will that affect the number of cars that I have? The more money I have, the more cars I can get. The less money I have, the less money I can, the less cars that I can get. When one goes down, the other one goes down. Sometimes when we get more of one thing, we get more exercise, we get less weight. That's a negative relationship. Which measure of variability is a measure of the average distance from the mean? Standard deviation. What is the standard deviation squared? That's just simply the variance. That gets both sides, positive and negative, of the mean. 2 standard deviations one way, 2 the other. That tells us that's standard deviation squared. What is a collection of statistical models used to analyze the difference among groups and their associated procedures, such as variation between the groups?
Analysis of variation.
Analysis of variation. There you go. What is used to determine the extent at which there's a linear relationship between dependent variables and one or more independent variables? That would be a linear regression. When tallying and representing how often a certain score occurs, which type of data illustration? That would be survey data. When tallying and representing how often a certain answer occurs, what do we call that?
Histogram.
A frequency distribution. Now, if we graphed it, it would be a frequency histogram if we actually showed it.
Okay.
All right. In a study, which is drawn from which? A sample from a larger population, a sample from a smaller population, a population from a sample, or a population from a larger sample?
A sample from a larger population.
That is correct. We pull a sample and we expect it to represent that larger population so that we can generalize our findings from that sample group to that larger population. We can't talk to everybody. We're going to talk to a random sample of that people from that group. We're going to pull that sample out of that population, and we're going to infer or generalize our findings to the bigger group. Again, our example this morning, we had this population of people who, 18-year-olds who applied to Gardner Webb. Our sample was the ones who came. The reason why we couldn't generalize the findings because we were trying to speak to the ones who didn't come. They were a different population. They were a different sample. So that convenient sample was not appropriate. In a study, a sample is drawn from a larger population and at random is assumed to be representative of that population. This is referred to as a random sample. What are the 4 levels of measurement?
Yeah.
Nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Nominal is yes, no, male, female. Ordinal is 1, 2, 3, 4. Interval is how far they are, and ratio shows how far, and is a combination of the ordinal and interval is ratio. What is the foundation of inferential statistics?
Probability.
Probability. That's why I do all the prop bets at Gardner Webb. Everybody knows what a prop bet is. You take and look at all the data, qualitative and quantitative. And we got all 20 of them right. Just that easy.
Okay.
Just that easy. I mean, we covered everything in terms today that you really need to know. We're now just going to get down in the weeds and do a little more work in these areas. I told you, you can do this stuff. It's not rocket science. Obviously, if I can do it, it's not rocket science. See, you know more than you think you do already.
Okay.
We're not going to make you do the calculus unless you want to do the calculus on those tests. That was a good question from Kim. You know, I'm not interested that you know how to set and do those things. You can Google that stuff now for free and just put your numbers in. It'll do it for you. It's not like when I came along, you had to do it by hand. You know, as long as you know how it's used, you can Google standard deviation and just put your numbers in and it'll tell you what it is. Duh. It's so easy to do the calculus, the math now. That's not the trick. How and when to use it is the trick. That's what you got to know, and the ethics of using it, and to know when somebody is using it against you. They're manipulating, they're deceiving in some way. Because again, 99% of the organizations that call you as a consultant know what the problem is. They're going to try to hide it from you so you'll pick something else, because they don't want to have to let Johnny go because Johnny's cousin is on, Johnny's uncle's on the board of trustees. We know Johnny's an idiot, but we can't say that out in public. We can't get rid of Johnny. So we're hoping you'll find something else. Or if you find out it's Johnny, you're an independent person, and so we let Johnny go. When you leave, the bad feeling leaves with you and doesn't stay with us. That's the life of a consultant. All right. Other questions, other issues? Now, I know that, yes, go ahead.
I'm
Kim.
sorry, I don't have a question. It's not a question because I know we're past our time. I just wanted to make sure, and I have to tell Tawanda this on a separate note. Just wanted to say thank you to all of you who showed your love and your support, your emails and your text messages, your phone calls, your cards, your visits. Jackie Palmer surprised me and drove from Charlotte to my house that weekend. I am so appreciative. Thank you all so very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for that. Again, prayers during this difficult time. All right, if there's nothing else for the good of the group, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 and we'll knock our second day out, and we'll be back on by the time, other than that third case study, we'll be back on track by the end of the day tomorrow. I appreciate everybody's participation today. Talk more tomorrow. I'll see you then.